Senator Roberts.
Thank you. As a servant to the many different people who make up our one Queensland community, I speak to the Infrastructure Australia Amendment, the independent review, supposedly, Bill 2023. This bill proposes to review any previous government infrastructure project that has not yet had spades in the ground, to stop previous government commitments. This bill guts the Infrastructure Australia Board, guts it, reducing the number from 12 people who know about infrastructure and business to 3 people on whom there is no requirement to know anything about infrastructure. Nothing. I expect the government to appoint 3 bureaucrats who appreciate advancement in the public service is based on giving the government whatever it wants to hear. To call that an impartial board is a joke. This bill requires Infrastructure Australia to take account of government policy, Where there is expertise, it will no doubt be solar, wind and battery backup, because this is the point of the bill. More taxpayers' money sacrificed on a pointless quest to save the world from cyclical natural climate variation, natural warming and cooling cycles. This bill will facilitate the destruction of native Australian forests and replace them with industrial wind and solar landscapes. These are parasitic misinvestments, forcing up energy prices and, as a result of energy scarcity, destroying employment in small and medium businesses and contributing to a massive transfer of wealth from everyday Australians to billionaire climate carpetbaggers. An amendment from Senator Pocock will force this exact outcome. The bill ensures every project must have a sponsor, meaning Infrastructure Australia can't advance its own projects. Good ideas aren't always commercial, or may be so large that a project sponsor risks bankruptcy to do the homework to advance the project to funding stage. In this case, Infrastructure Australia should be allowed to step in and develop an initial business case in the expectation that, should the project proceed, their investment would be recouped using private Australian capital. It's fair to say that the threat the future fund needs to contribute much more towards growing our national infrastructure. Snowy 2 is a salutary warning about what happens when the government takes a project through to decision stage first and then does the maths later, and then rubs out the maths. The process behind Snowy 2 should never happen again, and both sides of Parliament have been culpable. The bill requires Infrastructure Australia to take account of government policy. It's interesting to note some excellent amendments in the other place, the House of Representatives, designed to put commercial expertise into the bill while excluding conflict of interest. Those amendments all failed. I have introduced a committee-stage amendment that independent MP Dai Lee originally moved to require the disclosure of conflict of interest. Why wouldn't anyone want that? How can a government do a bill like this, which may spend $100 billion over 10 years, and not be worried about conflict of interest? I've spoken in the last few days about the negative influence of foreign investment funds on government policy. I can see nothing in this bill that would stop these predatory billionaire funds using this bill for their own interests. Other amendments that were not supported and still would not be supported are as follows. Firstly, an amendment to introduce a cost-benefit analysis for any project over $100 million. Apparently the government doesn't want cost-benefit analysis on investment projects. No doubt because there isn't a solar, wind or big battery project in the country that would pass a cost-benefit analysis. Not one. David Littleproud, MP, asked for one of the commissioners to have a substantial experience in rural and regional Australia. Excuse me. The Albanese government stopped that amendment from passing. And the same happened to amendments improving transparency and reporting to Parliament. They don't want transparency and reporting to Parliament. I know every opposition will talk about transparency before they get elected and then upon election make transparency worse, which is exactly what this government is doing. This Albanese government seems worse than most at breaking their election promises and killing transparency. Senator Rice proposed an amendment to make infrastructure more social, since we are all going to be stuck in our 15-minute cities or prisons, to use a more accurate term. Not if one nation can help it. I do thank Senator Rice for her amendment around continuity of existing projects. In this regard, the legislation was poorly worded. It's true some of the infrastructure Australia projects that hold so much promise are lagging. Many Queensland projects like the Urana Dam have not advanced since April 2022. This is no doubt to prepare these projects for abolition. Yet rather than Minister King being blamed, an independent Infrastructure Australia will be blamed for implementing government policy, as this bill requires. Infrastructure Minister King has terminated the Hells Gates Dam north of Charters Towers and the Sago Dam at Hughenden. This is yet another clear indication that the Albanese government are hollowing out the bush and delivering our best farmland to foreign multinational superannuation funds and merchant banks for the benefit of foreign interests to the exclusion of everyday Australians. Minister Plibersek's water policy changes introduced this week prove just how much this government hates the bush. Her proposed measures will destroy rural communities. Country towns have a critical mass of population and services below which a town is not viable. This government will wipe many Australian towns off the map and return that land to Gaia. The major banks know this already. They're acting like rats leaving a sinking ship with their branch closures. In effect, this Labor government is hollowing out the bush and using that money to line the pockets of climate carpetbaggers in order to buy votes back off the Teals and the Greens. City votes. The East-West Railway and multifunction corridor with associated steel parks have been progressed to the next stage at Infrastructure Australia following One Nation initiating a Senate inquiry. I look forward to the new board continuing those projects. That's why real infrastructure, dams, railroads, baseload power stations and ports will never be built outside the capital cities, because the government wants to hollow out the bush. It is hollowing out the bush. That's why real infrastructure will not be built outside the capital cities. The only infrastructure the bush will get is unwanted infrastructure: wind turbines, solar panels and a spider web of high-voltage power lines growing like cancer across rural Australia. And like a cancer, these infernal things are killing productive farmland, destroying native forests and destroying the native fauna who used to live there, and killing pristine creeks. No one in the bush wants these kamikaze, parasitic misinvestments. There's support from city folks eager to feel like worthy climate warriors while driving petrol cars, living in freestanding houses, taking overseas holidays and dialling their air conditioning up to max. All justified because they support the campaign Saving the Planet with solar and wind power, as long as they are built in someone else's backyard. Infrastructure is supposed to make life easier, not harder. Infrastructure is designed to add to our productive capacity, to grow the pie for all Australians. We hear so often that workers don't deserve pay rises because they've stopped working harder and productivity has declined. Well, let me ask, what happened to the government working harder? What happened to infrastructure that makes the internet faster, freight forwarding faster, electricity cheaper, and products like timber, cement and steel readily available and accessible? This is what makes workers more productive: better tools and better supplies. Make no mistake, under this Albanese government, the lives of everyday Australians will be harder, pay packets will not go as far, and opportunity for advancement will become harder and harder to find. One Nation's Queensland infrastructure program includes: One Nation will build the East-West Railroad across the top end from Western Australia to North Queensland to provide market access for extraction and grazing industries. But that's not all it does. These industries frequently have Aboriginal owners or employ a high proportion of Aboriginal staff. And tourism. One Nation will build the multi-purpose corridor in the same footprint as that railroad line to bring power, water, internet and local train travel to Aboriginal and rural communities. Build the steel parks and take more of the $2 trillion steel market for Australians, growing our economy with breadwinner jobs and solid foreign exchange earnings. Build the Great Dividing Range project, a dam, hydro and irrigation project to deliver environmentally friendly economic growth to North Queensland. Cheap power will unleash North Queensland. Build the Emu Swamp Dam, the Urana Irrigation Project, the Big Rocks Weir and the Hughenden Irrigation Project. One Nation will run the inland rail from Five Star into Queensland along the Moonee Highway alignment and then across to Miles, then through Wandoan to Banana to terminate at the port of Gladstone. We will connect the port of Gladstone to the East-West rail line to create a national rail loop that will take hundreds of thousands of heavy truck movements off the roads while improving transit times. We will not build the Pioneer Pumped Hydro project, as this not only destroys the environment of the Pioneer Valley, it's a complete fraud on the part of Premier Palaszczuk. This project is a fake idea to win votes in the city in the next election and take attention off the Mackay-based hospital's many problems that the government's caused, while it will also waste millions in feasibility studies that will ultimately show this is a really stupid idea, a dishonest idea. To guarantee Australia's power supply, we only need to build coal-fired power stations using new technology. This new technology shows the public the hypocrisy of the renewable lobby. They criticise coal as being dirty, so that industry develops technology that captures the carbon dioxide and turns those into useful products, fertiliser, fuel and hydrogen. This new technology allows clean energy to meet our net zero targets while providing reliable baseload power at a fraction of the cost of solar and wind. I don't give a damn about UN net zero targets, but if you want to meet them, here's a way of doing it productively. This should be supported across this parliament, yet these net zero vandals will not admit that transition is a disaster harming everyday Australians and will never deliver cheap, reliable energy. Why are you doing it? Why? What's your agenda? I suggest it's to orchestrate a power shortage, transport and production in order to usher in a new era of Soviet-style controls. You've already shown it. You've already shown it. The complete subjugation of Australia, as has been occurring since the signing of the UN's Lima Declaration in 1975 by the Whitlam Prime Minister under Labor, ratified the following year in 1976 by the Fraser Liberal Prime Minister. Labor destroys, one nation will build. One nation will build so that people can build. Human progress and economic prosperity depend on human initiative, and that needs opportunity and support. Opportunity and support flourish on freedom and on infrastructure for businesses to grow. Small businesses rely on infrastructure and start growing. There are 8 keys to human progress, in my belief. The first is freedom. The freedom to come up with ideas, exchange ideas, implement ideas. The second is rule of law. We're seeing that smashed in the last 3 years. The third is stable, solid, sustainable governance, a continuing governance, a constitution. We have that. We have one of the world's best constitutions. Number 4 is security of property rights, which was stolen by the Howard Anderson Liberal National Party government from 1996 through to 2007. Stole farmers' property rights, the key to human progress. The 5th thing is strong families, being destroyed by policies put in place by the United Nations, from the United Nations, since 1975 with the Family Law Act, the slaughterhouse of the nation. Remembering cheap energy, that is fundamental. That is the most significant factor for human progress. Cheap energy. Affordable, accessible, reliable, dependable, secure, stable. A taxation system that is efficient, not inefficient as the current taxation system is. And lastly, honest money. We need to return to a people's bank in this country. The Commonwealth Bank, when it was the People's Bank early last century, was responsible for human progress in this country, dramatic progress in this country. We only had 5 million people, but the Commonwealth Bank took care of building our country into a big country. And Australia, 120 years ago and 110 years ago, had the highest per capita income in the world. To build a nation, people need infrastructure. People build a nation. People need infrastructure to build a nation. Australia has done this. We rose to number 1 in the world. And that is instead of what Labor is doing now, which is the complete subjugation of Australia. Labor destroys, one nation will build, because the people of Australia have already proven we can build, and they've done it many times.